Just moments after predicting his own death, Jesus turns to the crowd and says something no marketing consultant would ever recommend. If you want to follow me, you have to die. This is Mark 8:34-38, and it forces us to ask whether we're following Jesus or just admiring him. Check out verse 34 from the ESV. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." What's the first thing we see? Jesus has intentionally expanded the audience from just his disciples to a mixture of disciples and the general public. So what? What does this tell us? While Jesus was alone with the disciples, 4 significant things happened. First, Peter recognized that Jesus is the Christ, the anointed Messiah. Second, Jesus explained what that really meant: suffering and death, followed by resurrection. Third, Peter rebuked Jesus for talking like that. And fourth, Jesus called Peter Satan for focusing on this world and not God's kingdom. After the insiders, typified by Peter, failed to understand what following the Messiah meant, Jesus chose to share it with a broader audience, inviting those who understood it to follow him. Look at what he said: "If anyone would come after me." To whom is Jesus speaking? Anyone. This information applies to all who hear it, and what else? And would come after him. This is discipleship language, the same appeal that Jesus made to the early disciples along the Sea of Galilee. "Leave your nets and boats and come after me." But the appeal to follow him has a different tone than it did then. Now Jesus adds, "Let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Discipleship has always involved denial of self and becoming as much like the Master as possible. But here, Jesus includes carrying a cross. Whose cross? Not Jesus's cross. Not a necklace as a symbol, but his cross, meaning the cross belonging to the one choosing to follow Jesus. Everyone in the first century understood a cross as a device for torture and death at the hands of the Romans. Jesus just explicitly told potential disciples that following him includes the potential of losing one's life in a most horrible way. Don't forget, when Peter, the man who was first called to be a disciple, heard that Jesus was headed for torture, abuse, and death, he rebuked him. Now, potential disciples are being told to count on the same treatment. Wow, that's a big deal. Look at verse 35. "For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it." Clinging to life won't save it. In my imagination, Jesus was looking at Peter when he said that, but that's just speculation on my part. And whoever loses his life, not randomly or for some actual crime or misdeed, but for the sake of Christ and his gospel, shall actually save his life. Peter had earlier objected to that suffering and death talk, presumably believing Jesus should cling to life. But Jesus here corrects that worldview. Check out verses 36 and 37. "For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul?" Jesus asks 2 rhetorical questions to reset the value system. He doesn't expect anyone to answer, because the answer is implied in the questions. He compares the value of a person's soul, his or her being or life, to the whole world. Would you trade the intrinsic you, your entire being and self, for all the stuff the world can offer? What would be the point? You've done it at the cost of your soul. Even if you had the whole world, you wouldn't have enough to trade for your own soul. So what does this mean? Clinging to the world, rejecting the call to follow him because it may include a cross, is a poor choice. Because even if you somehow got the whole world, it would not equal what you've lost. The last verse is incredible. Look at verse 38. For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Why do you think Jesus mentions people being ashamed of him and his words? Is this a direct reference to Peter's rebuke of Jesus' description of his suffering, rejection, death, and resurrection? Let me know what you think in the comments. This verse is a major pivot point in Mark's account of Jesus' message and ministry. He's now talking to the crowd, not just the disciples, and he's openly calling himself the Son of Man, a well-known title for the Messiah. And he's talking about a time in the future when he will come with the glory of his Father, calling God his own Father. This refers back to God calling Jesus his Son at his baptism. And when he comes in his Father's glory, the holy angels, the host of heaven, will come with him. For a first-century Jewish audience, this is a description of impending judgment. Jesus said, "Those ashamed of me and my words now will find that in the day of judgment I will be ashamed of them." So Jesus said to his current disciples and potential future disciples that acceptance and yieldedness as followers today has eternal consequences at the judgment. Why? Because discipleship means accepting the full teaching of the Master and walking the same path as the Master. It means patterning oneself after the Master as much as is in one's power. What it definitely does not mean is rebuking the Master when you don't like the implications of his teaching. So what can we take away from these verses? The cross is not optional for disciples. If anyone, including you and me, chooses to follow him, it includes taking up our own cross. It doesn't mean that you'll definitely lose your life, but that's absolutely on the table. But while following Jesus may cost your life, it more importantly saves your soul. Discipleship isn't just a question of what do you believe, but who are you living for, and how completely? That's the end of Mark chapter 8. There's big stuff on the horizon in chapter 9, like a statement that some won't taste death until after they see the kingdom come with power. You don't want to miss that. Thanks for studying with me. Please share So What Scripture with your friends.